Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S IAS. In today's live session, we'll have a discussion on certain very important economy related events that have taken place between 2nd to 8th of October 2021. Let's begin the discussion. The first article is related to the coal crisis that is being discussed very recently in the economy. Now, with respect to this particular article, only small amount of information has been provided and it is the same with respect to most of the newspapers. But for UPSC, let's say in mains, you can expect a question on the overall energy security or energy issue in case of India. In the recent times, we have seen issue with respect to the crude prices, which have basically reflected the retail higher prices in the market. We have experienced higher natural gas prices very recently. We have now experienced the coal crisis, which Government of India yesterday has clarified, no, there is no crisis in the coal segment. In addition to this, there is also discussion with respect to LPG issue. So it is very safe to say now, there is certain issue with respect to energy security in India. And in case of UPSC, you might expect a question either in the prelims, not this year, next year, or you might expect a mains based question this year itself based on the concept of energy security, because there is so much of a discussion that has been happening. Now let me connect the dots. Let me start with the coal crisis that is being discussed here. First and foremost, understand the concept here. In case of India, coal is required for multiple purposes. Is it okay? Coal is required for multiple purposes. In case of electricity generation, you require coal. In case of fertilizer sector, cement sector, etc., there are so many sectors wherein coal is required. First point. Second point, the amount of coal that we produce in case of India is lesser than the amount of coal that is demanded. As a result of which, we import coal into India. Is it okay? We import coal into India for multiple reasons. So essentially, if you're importing, you're dependent on the imports, and if there is any issue with respect to the prices of the coal in the international market, can you connect it to the import prices in India? Can you connect it to, let's say, the cost of production of, let's say, electricity, fertilizer, cement, metal industries, etc.? Definitely yes. Third, in the recent times, in the last 1 week itself, there are a lot of newspaper articles which are basically discussing that as per the against the government mandate of maintaining, let's say, the 14 days reserve. The Government of India has stated that the coal plants which are basically generating thermal energy in India, they are supposed to hold 14 days worth of reserves of coal. As against this particular mandated 14 days, many of these particular coal power plants are holding, let's say, worth of 2 days reserves, worth of 3 days reserves, worth of 4 days reserves, etc. And that is the precise reason various articles or various experts were saying the situation could become much graver, and in which situation or in that particular context, Indian government might have to end up rationing power as it is being done in case of China currently. So in this particular context, what is the argument here? Fourth very important point, why coal is important? Let's take electricity itself. I am focused on electricity here. Let's take electricity. As of now, latest information, we have around 383 gigawatts of installed capacity of electricity. Out of this particular 383, more than 50% of this, that is around 202 gigawatts plus of installed capacity of energy is basically produced through coal, and another 101 gigawatt comes from renewable energy, 45 gigawatts comes from hydro, around 26 gigawatts come from gas, etc. So essentially the argument here is, because majority of the electricity that is produced in India comes from the coal itself, comes from the thermal segment, there might be issue with respect to availability of a coal, which might affect how much electricity is produced, and as a result of this, government will have no option but to ration electricity, supply electricity to different segments in a different way because of the lower production capacity. Now why this was being discussed? There was a shortage of coal supply because of some of the reasons. One, in the international market, the demand for coal has increased. Is it okay? And if you ask me, sir, why it has increased? Because there is the recovery that is taking place in majority of the economies. The demand for electricity has increased. More and more industries are demanding coal now to generate electricity or to produce something. As a result of this, the demand for coal in the international market has started rising. Same is applicable to many of the commodities in the international market. And the prices of these particular coal commodity, as a commodity, the prices also have started increasing, connected to import. So imports are becoming costlier. Second, in case of India, Government of India has stated that by 24 we want to eliminate imports altogether. Right? We want to ensure that the Coal India Limited, which is a public owned entity, government owned entity, we want to increase the production of CIL to 1 billion tons by 24, thereby eliminating the import of coal. Various experts have stated that no, this is not possible. If you go by the current situation, if you go by adding how much increased capacity is being done by CIL, by 24 you might have at the most around 800 million tons, 1 billion ton is not possible. So even after 2024, there is an expectation that India will be dependent on the coal imports. And recently, understand this, in the recent situation, what has happened is, Coal India Limited, because of a monsoon, right, because of monsoon, it has been, right, unable to basically mine out sufficient amount of a coal. The coal mining activities have been affected, so supply of coal has been affected. And the last year or before that, because there was a lockdown, as a result of this, industrialization activity was affected. So CIL had mined out, had stored some of the stock of the coal. And this particular stock of the coal has been exhausted by Coal India Limited, because suddenly there is a recovery which is taking place in the Indian economy. Because of these particular reasons, there was a sudden shortage which started appearing, which started threatening the energy security in case of India. Now, if there is energy security, what will happen? I am just putting everything together now. If there is energy security, for example, if there is an issue with respect to crude oil prices, natural gas, right, let's say coal, what will happen because of this? First and foremost, it will have an impact on the current account. It will definitely have an impact on the current account, because we are heavily dependent on the import of coal, import of natural gas, import of a crude oil, etc. This will have an impact on the current account. Second, it will also have an impact on the recovery which is taking place in the Indian economy recently. Very recently, we have moved out of the recession, technical recession, and we have started registering a positive growth rate. And this particular positive growth rate, or the tendency of the economic recovery, might be affected if there is no sufficient amount of electricity that is available. That will also be affected. Third one, if the energy security is not attained currently, what will happen as a result of this? The government's subsidy bill might increase. Is it okay? The government subsidy might increase. Some of you will be confused. Sir, what is the connection with energy security with subsidy? Government provides a subsidy in case of fertilizer production or the supply of fertilizers in the domestic market. And one of the inputs that is used is electricity. Right? So in case of that, if the cost of input increases, obviously it will have an impact on the cost of production. That is one way. Another way is, many of these particular fertilizer production units are using coal, and if there is a shortage of coal, price of the coal increases. Will it have an impact on the cost of production of these particular units? Definitely yes. And you might see that these particular fertilizer plants will not have any other option but to transfer the cost of this higher coal that they have purchased in the form of market prices. And because government provides a subsidy on these particular fertilizers, the subsidy bill of the government might also increase. So these are some of the very important effects that you can see if there is no energy security that is obtained by the government. So these are some of the points. What is the way forward then? What is the way forward? One expert basically argues that because there is a higher dependence on the coal and the coal prices are increasing, this is the right time for Government of India to push more and more usage of natural gas. Yes, very recently the cost of natural gas has been increased. But even after there is an increase by more than 60% by Government of India in terms of natural gas prices, natural gas is much more competitive in terms of comparison with coal. So it provides an opportunity for Government of India to push more and more usage of natural gas. So these are some of the very, very important points with respect to the coal crisis that is being discussed in the recent times. Now based on this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements. Out of the total installed capacity, that is I am talking about let's say the thermal focused on the coal production here. It accounts, that is the thermal or coal production electricity accounts for around 3/4 of the total installed capacity. Statement is wrong. Already we have seen this. It accounts for around 53% of the total installed capacity. Second, renewable energy accounts for around 26% of the total installed capacity. This particular statement is true. Installed renewable energy capacity is about half of the total thermal, again focused on the coal capacity installation. Even this particular statement is true. So 2 and 3 are correct. Right option will be option C. Now in addition to this, right, although many of the papers have not discussed this, recently Government of India, remember this, to address the issue with respect to coal sector, has allowed the captive coal mines to sell 50% of the coal produced in the open market. Now what is the meaning of this particular statement? I'll repeat the statement first. Government of India very recently has allowed the captive coal mines to sell 50% of the total annual or fiscal production in the open market. What is the importance of this? One, captive coal mines. What is the importance of this particular term? In case of captive coal mines, there is a restriction with respect to end usage. For example, if I give a coal mine for, let's say, steel manufacturing, right, because coal is used there, right, one of these particular steel manufacturers will acquire this particular coal block. In such cases, this particular coal which is mined out shall be used only for steel production. So captive coal mining is associated with end usage restriction. Now Government of India says we have amended the MMDR Act, we have also amended the rule of 1960. As a result of this, we will allow these particular captive coal mine owners to sell 50% of the total production done in a financial year to sell in an open market. This is expected to, one, increase a coal supply in the market, right, so there is no coal shortage. Second, this will also allow these particular coal mine, the holders or the lessees, to invest more, mine more coal and sell them in the open market. This will give them one more opportunity to increase investment, production and selling in the market. And the third very important point here, when these particular, right, the mine lessees or the lease holders, they are going to mine out more coal, they are supposed to pay certain charges to the state government. So the revenue collected by the state governments will also increase. So this is one very important step that has been announced by the government very recently to address the coal supply issue in the market. Done? Next article, with respect to food grain procurement, right, this is being discussed very recently. Understand the concept here. Government of India announces MSP for 23 crops. Done? Some books will say 24, some books will say 23. I have gone with the CSE website, it says 23. So let's say 23 crops, MSP is announced, but the procurement of the government, because they need food grains under public distribution system, is centered around the paddy as well as wheat. Is it okay? It is centered around paddy and wheat. Majority of the procurement that is done by the government is in the form of a paddy and wheat. Now what has happened is, in the last year, Government of India procured around half of the total production of these particular crops in the market under a concept called as open procurement policy. Now what do you mean by open procurement policy? Understand this also very carefully. Under open procurement policy, a farmer can sell his crop to the government or to any agency which is appointed by the government, for example, Food Corporation of India. So a farmer can sell his crop if he meets the criteria with respect to, let's say, the quality of the food grain and within certain time period. That is, whenever the procurement will be done, the time period will be told by the government, and what kind of quality of crop will be procured, the quality standards will be decided by central government. And if you can meet both of these particular criteria, then any amount of food grains, for example, paddy, wheat, coarse grains, the pulses very recently, you can sell it to government or government denominated agency. You are allowed to do that. This particular policy is called as open procurement policy. So Government of India has been following an open procurement policy because government says, I want to ensure that under open procurement policy, farmers will sell it to government, government will pay MSP to the farmers farmers will be paid remunerative prices on their crop. I want to support the farmers by conducting the open procurement policy. And second, as usual, I require food grains under public distribution system. And for that also, I will procure under the open procurement policy. Again, under open procurement policy, there is a concept of centralized procurement as well as a decentralized procurement. But more importantly, government says last year, we procured around 60 lakh tons, right? We procured around 60 lakh tons of these particular food grains. You don't have to mug up this particular number. It procured around half of the total production of these particular food grains. But the problem here is when government procures so much of the food grains, one, it has to pay huge amount of MSP. That's the first point. Second point, it has to store these particular food grains. That is the handling cost, the interest cost, and the storage cost of these particular food grains is going to increase. As a result of this, the total amount of a subsidy bill that is borne by the government will also expand. So, Government of India is of the opinion that we are procuring too much. And please understand, this is not the first time that the Government of India is saying this. Even in the earlier reports of CSE, Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices, they basically warned Government of India against the concept of open procurement policy. So, Government of India in this particular year is saying that we will focus on how much food grain we are going to procure. We are not going to procure through concept of open procurement policy. We will have certain restrictions under this. We are going to impose certain guidelines as to how do you procure the food grains from the farmers. For example, in case of Punjab and Haryana, now the state governments are basically saying that we are going to limit how much food grain we are going to procure from the farmers under the concept of procurement policy. Per acre, we are going to limit the amount of procurement to 25 quintals of food grains. For example, if I am procuring, let's say, paddy, if a farmer sells paddy to me under the procurement policy, then how much he will be allowed to sell? As per the latest policy of Punjab and Haryana, he will be allowed to sell up to 25 quintals per acre. So, this kind of restriction has been announced very recently by the state government because the central government is asking them to do it. And the experts are saying two things here. One, already the farmers are concerned that the Government of India is introducing these particular laws related to agriculture sector which is going to affect their returns. For example, the 3 agriculture reforms. In addition to this, now the central government says, I am going to restrict how much I am going to procure under the open procurement policy. I am going to change this particular policy, amend this particular policy, and I am going to restrict how much procurement I will be doing from these particular farmers. This is going to antagonize the farmers much further, and especially the farmers from Punjab and Haryana are the 2 states where the farmers have been benefited very greatly because of the open procurement policy of the government. Right? So, these are some of the very important points which are being discussed in this particular article. Done? Now, based on this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements regarding procurement policy of the government in regards to food grains. First statement, the procurement is open-ended, that is, farmers are allowed to sell any crop, underline the term any crop, at any point of the time in a year. Are they allowed to sell any crop to the government? No. Can they sell it at any point of time? No. The government will notify which crop, government will notify what time period, and Government of India will also notify what should be the quality of the food grains. Right? So, first statement wrong. Second, the food grains are procured by paying the existing market prices. No, this particular statement is also wrong. Whenever the Government of India procures under this particular policy, the government ensures that it will pay MSP to the farmers, not the existing market prices. So, both the statements are wrong. Right option will be option D, none of them are correct. Next article, Srei Company. Very recently, RBI has basically removed or suspended the board of 2 of the NBFCs of Srei Company. Now, understand the concept here. Within this particular Srei group of companies, there are 2 NBFCs, non-banking financial companies. One is Srei Infrastructure NBFC, and the second one is Srei Equipment NBFC. What has happened is, these 2 NBFCs have taken loans from the market. Is it okay? They have borrowed from the market. They have issued debentures, they have issued bonds, short-term, long-term arrangements have been made. Through various sources, they have borrowed from the market. And what do NBFCs do? They will basically lend. So both of these particular NBFCs have given loans to different types of borrowers in the market. Now because of the pandemic, what has happened is, these particular borrowers who had taken money from these two NBFCs, they have entered into an agreement where these particular debts would be recast. That is, the loans have been rearranged, repayment has been done, right? That is basically the debt recast has been allowed. So when this particular arrangement has been done with respect to repayment of the loans, it has created financial pressure on both of these particular NBFCs. In addition to this, RBI says that there are allegations of misappropriation of the funds by both of these particular NBFCs. So what RBI did was, it initially investigated and very recently announced that we are going to basically remove the board of both of these particular NBFCs, and we are going to appoint a person to look after these particular NBFCs, and second, we are going to take them to IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, so that the debt recovery can be done. Both of these particular NBFCs put together owe around 28,000 crore rupees. Okay, they owe around 28,000 crore rupees. So we want to have a debt recovery of these two, right, from these two NBFCs from IBC. Now, what are the important points you need to understand this particular article? Do not mug up the sequence. Do not mug up the story. Story is not important. For UPSC, the concepts are important. For example, what is the connection between an NBFC, non-banking financial company, and IBC? Because most of the books that if you have read, they will basically say under IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, it will handle the insolvency resolution of corporates and retail borrowers. Is it okay? They will handle the insolvency resolution of the corporates as well as retail borrowers. True, but not completely. Why? To begin with, when we launched the concept of IBC many years ago, we started with insolvency resolution of corporates as well as retail borrowers. But over a period of time, we realized that we need to have insolvency resolution framework, a unified framework for the banking institutions, NBFCs, microfinancial institutions, in simple terms, financial service providers, FSPs. And that is the precise reason Government of India introduced the concept of Financial Resolution Deposit Insurance Bill, which was withdrawn by the government. Now, you cannot have the IBC as a unified framework on one side and a fragmented framework for, let's say, financial institutions on the other hand. So what Government of India did was, they introduced basically a provision within this particular IBC as per which, if you are a financial service provider, not including banks or excluding banks, if you are a financial service provider whose assets are over 500 crore rupees, then you can be dragged to IBC. Is it okay? Or the insolvency resolution of this particular the financial service provider is allowed to be conducted under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. This is the first very important point you need to understand. Second, why this news article is very important. It is important for a simple reason. NBFCs are very, very important for Indian economy. There is a particular reason why these are referred as a shadow banks. Why? Apart from the banking sector, it is the NBFCs which will also give a lot of credit, which will also issue a lot of loans in the market. They have specialized institutions to lend in infrastructure development. They have specialized institutions to lend for housing loans, vehicle loans, etc. Right? So NBFCs also play a very, very important role. But in the recent times, these particular NBFCs have come under a lot of pressure. Why? It started with the default of IL and FS. It started with the whole, the problem with NBFCs started with the debacle of infrastructure leasing and financial services, where they had borrowed, they defaulted on the repayment, again there was accusation of mismanagement of the funds, etc. And after this there was one more NBFC, Diwan Housing Finance Limited, DHFL. Right? This also, right, became very, very problem financial institution, and RBI basically dragged this particular DHFL to IBC. So as such, because of Island FS, which was one of the biggest NBFCs, which defaulted, there was a ripple effect, there was a spillover effect within the NBFC segment. NBFCs were finding it very hard to borrow, raise money from the market. And after that, there was a crisis in DHFL. Now there is a crisis with respect to these two NBFCs. So that is the importance of this particular newspaper article. NBFC, you will have to connect that with this particular article wherein RBI has basically moved over or has removed the boards of these two NBFCs and has appointed a person to oversee the functioning and has dragged it to IBC. Done? So these are certain very important points with respect to this particular newspaper article. Let me go to the next article. Sebi and IPO. Very recently Sebi has proposed two very important changes. Let's understand these two changes. Apart from that, nothing else is important from the article. What are the two important changes? Whenever initial public offering is done or IPO is conducted for any company, there are two processes which can be followed, right? Obviously one of them has to be used. That is, when the shares are issued, the company can go for a book building process, or the company can go for the concept of a fixed issue. What is the basic difference here? In case of a fixed issue, in the offer document, the company says exactly at what price the shares are sold. Is it okay? Under fixed issue methodology, the company in the offer document says exactly what price, at what price the shares will be issued. Whereas in case of a book building process, the company doesn't decide the price of the share, it will provide a band for the share. That is, the price band will be decided. Let's say hypothetically a particular company wants to issue the shares in the market. It has decided the lowest price at which the share would be issued will be 100. But in addition to this, it will also decide what should be the maximum price, that is the bandwidth within which these particular two extremes of the prices, the shares shall be issued in the market. Let's say hypothetically the lowest band is 100, highest band will be 110. Is it okay? Lowest band price is 100 and the highest band price is 110. And within these two extremes these two extremes will be used and the subscription will be obtained by the investors in the market and the allocation of the shares would be done. Now you will be thinking, sir, why are you teaching all of this in the current affairs? It is important. Why? First, SEBI basically has a guideline which says that lowest price band, right, imagine it is 100, then the highest price at which the shares would be issued should not be more than 20% of this particular lowest price band. What is the meaning of this? If the lowest price at which you want to issue under IPO methodology is 100, then the highest price at which you want to issue should not be more than 120 rupees. So within these two extremes itself, you will have to decide, that is, you will have to obtain the subscription from the investors, right? So only understand this, the SEBI has basically stated the highest should not be more than 20% of this particular lowest price band, right? The difference should not be more than 20%. Now what has happened is, very recently SEBI has found that there are certain companies which are going for IPO, they are selling these particular shares under book building process, they are issuing the shares under book building process, but the difference between the lowest band and the highest band of the share price is either 1 rupee or 2 rupee or 3 rupee, which essentially means if the lowest price at which you want to sell in the market, the shares of your company is 100, then the highest band or the highest price you have decided, it will be 101 or 102 rupees or 103 rupees. Because they are basically saying, RBI says it should not be more than 20% difference. The difference between the lowest band and the highest price should not be more than 20%. The SEBI has not decided the lowest band. That is, how much should be the minimum gap between this has not been decided. But the highest difference between the highest price and the lowest price, that is a band of these particular share prices, should not cross more than 20%. That is what has been decided by SEBI. That is a precise reason these are selling in a difference of the prices of 1 rupee, 2 rupee, 3 rupee like this. And what is the concern here? The concern, SEBI says, the conditions that the issuer, that is the company which is issuing the shares, in case of a book building process, the conditions are different. And in case of a fixed issue price, the conditions are different. And these particular companies, by basically having a very minute or marginal differences between the lowest band price and the highest band price, are camouflaging, are basically conducting a type of fixed price issue, but they are camouflaging that as a concept of a book building process. Because if you imagine a situation, a particular company wants to sell the shares through book building process. but the highest and the lowest price within the band they have decided, highest will be 101 rupee and the lowest will be 100 rupee. So hardly how much is the difference? 1 rupee. So can I simply say it is as good as a fixed price issue itself? Right? So the conditions which are applicable for the issuer under fixed price issue is different, and conditions under the book building issue are different. So these particular issuers are camouflaging a fixed price issue in the form of a book building process itself. And that is a precise reason SEBI has proposed two very important changes. One is more appropriate with respect to this particular practice. SEBI says right now the difference between the highest price and the lowest price, that is the band, should not be more than 20%. Now we are going to decide what should be the minimum difference between the highest as well as the lowest. For example, they are proposing 5% difference between the highest as well as the lowest. Means what? If a particular company wants to issue the shares under the book building process at the lowest price of 100 rupee, then the highest price should be at least 5% higher than this. Is it okay? Lowest price is 100, then the highest should be at least 5% higher than this. Then the company shall decide the highest price to be at least 105 rupees. So earlier the maximum difference was defined. Now the SEBI wants to define what should be the minimum difference between the lowest price as well as the highest price within this particular book building process. That is the first thing. Second thing, generally when you talk about IPO, you can divide these particular investors within IPO under three groups. Okay, you can divide the investors under three groups. One, the qualified financial institutions, non-institutional investors as well as the retail investors. Now within non-institutional investors, SEBI wants to divide these particular NIIs. They want to have two categories within these particular NIIs, so that more and more investments can be obtained, can be attracted through these particular NIIs. So these are the two very important changes that have been proposed by SEBI under the concept of IPO. Okay. Next article, very important, PM-MITRA scheme or PM-MITRA project of the government. First and foremost, this particular Mitra scheme is associated with textile sector. Is it okay? It is associated with the textile sector. What is the expansion of this particular PM-MITRA? Pradhan Mantri Mega Integrated Textile Region and Apparel. Okay, Pradhan Mantri Mega Integrated Textile Region and Apparel. What are the important points? Right? Understand this, in the earlier videos also, we have referred to the concept of PM-MITRA. Right? You will ask me, sir, if you have referred, why are you discussing this again? Very recently, Cabinet has approved this particular project, and second, the details of the project have been announced by the Cabinet. That is the reason I am going to discuss this particular article here. First, under PM-MITRA scheme, we have proposed 7 textile parks. Okay, 7 PM-MITRA parks will be developed under this particular scheme. And please understand, these particular parks will be developed as a joint venture between central government and state governments, where the states will be holding 51% of the equity. Is it okay? The states will be holding 51% of the equity. Third very important point, for this particular scheme or the implementation of this particular scheme, Cabinet has approved the total expenditure or has allocated 4,445 crore rupees. Fourth very important point, who is going to develop this particular park? Right, these particular parks will be developed in various states. For that, the states will have to bid. The states will have to provide at least 1,000 acres of contiguous land. That is, continuous land should be provided. Attached land should be provided by the state governments. Next, fifth very important point. Under this particular project, Government of India has announced a viability gap of funding. Please remember this. Under this particular project, Government of India has announced viability gap of funding. There are two types of funds which have been announced here, or the assistance that have been announced. One is a developmental capital support, DCS. Second, competitiveness incentive support. Understand these two very carefully. With respect to the first one, I will use the short form here. DCS will be provided by the government for development of parks. Is it okay? It will be provided by the government for the development of parks. Second one, the CIS will be provided for the units which are going to work in the park. That is the difference. Please do not get confused. In the context of the first one, developmental capital support, under this particular PM-MITRA scheme, or let's say the project of the government, we are going to promote development of both greenfield projects as well as brownfield projects. Remember this. We are going to promote the greenfield parks as well as the brownfield parks. Okay. And in case of the greenfield park, under this particular developmental capital support, up to 30%, remember this, up to 30% of the cost of the project, maximum, that is up to 500 crore rupees will be provided. I repeat, right, under this particular PM-MITRA, government says we are going to develop 7 textile parks. These particular parks could be greenfield parks or brownfield parks. But for these particular greenfield parks, we are going to provide up to 30% of the cost of the project in the form of VGF, or this could be a maximum of 500 crore rupees. And in the context of the brownfield projects, government says we are going to provide 30% of the cost of the project to be converted as a textile park, and this cannot cross more than 300 crore rupees. Is it okay? Just make a correction, 200 crore rupees. So this is the developmental capital support. And the second one, competitiveness incentive support, CIS, this is provided, that is 300 crore rupees per park has been provided. Is it okay? 300 crore rupees per park has been provided under this particular competitiveness incentive support. But government says this particular 300 crore rupees has to be provided for the textile units which are going to function within these particular textile parks. This is not for the park, but for the units which are located, which are set up within these particular textile parks. And a maximum up to 3% of the turnover. Understand this, how much incentive can be provided for these particular the units within the park? Maximum up to 3% of the respective turnover of these particular units can be provided in the form of competitiveness incentive support. So these are some of the very, very important points with respect to the PM-MITRA. What is the importance of this particular scheme, right? Why Government of India is pushing for this particular PM-MITRA project as such? First, textile sector is labor intensive. You will have to remember this. Textile sector is labor intensive. It creates a lot of employment opportunities. Second, the textiles, right? Textiles as well as apparels account for around 12%. I am just rounding off the number. Around 12% of the total exports from India, and account for around 2.2% of GDP of India. Government of India wants to promote this particular textile sector. Third very important point, right now if you talk about textiles, there is a fragmentation in the value chain. That is, there are different stages in the textile as well as apparel. For example, there is a spinning, there is a weaving, there is a, let's say, printing, there is a designing, there is a, let's say, a manufacturing of these particular the products as such. There is a fragmented value chain system. The production of cotton happens in some of the states. The purification of this, a conversion happens in some other states. Right? The spinning happens in some other states. The weaving or the production of garments happens in some other states. So there is a fragmented framework within this particular the textile segment as such. As a result of this, these particular products are moved, raw materials are moved from one place to another place, which adds to cost of logistics. And the Government of India wants to avoid that. That is the precise reason within this particular PM-MITRA or the textile parks, these will be developed on the concept of cluster approach. Remember this term. These will be developed on the concept of cluster approach. What do you mean by cluster approach? Whatever activities within the value chain are required within this particular apparel or textile segment, all of these particular activities will be developed, will be done within one park itself. Rather than moving the raw material from one place to another place, which is adding to the time, cost, etc., we want to eliminate all of this. And that is the reason PM-MITRA, under that the textile parks will be developed under the concept of cluster approach. And just to be on a safer side, this concept of PM-MITRA is based on the concept of 5F vision of Prime Minister. Remember this, 5F vision of Prime Minister, that is basically from farm to fiber, from fiber to factory, from factory to fashion, and from fashion to foreign. Is it okay? These are the 5Fs, right? This is the 5F vision given by the Prime Minister, and the concept of PM-MITRA or the textile parks which are proposed under this, right, are an outcome of this particular 5F vision. Next very important point, under this particular concept of PM-MITRA, because I stated that these are labor intensive, each of the parks will be generating 1 lakh direct jobs and 2 lakh indirect jobs. Remember this, right? Each of these particular parks will be generating 1 lakh direct jobs as well as 2 lakh indirect jobs. So there are totally 7 parks. So 7 lakh direct jobs. Some of the books, or let's say the magazines, would have given this. Don't say they are wrong. They are taking totally 7 parks. I am talking each of the parks. Okay, so 7 lakh total jobs, that is a direct jobs, and 14 lakh indirect jobs are proposed to be created under this particular PM-MITRA scheme. Done. So these are some of the very important points with respect to PM-MITRA. Please be very careful. Question: consider the following statements regarding PM-MITRA. Only greenfield projects will be incentivized under this. Statement is wrong. Greenfield projects as well as the brownfield projects. The parks under this will be developed under PPP. Statement is correct, but look at the second part of this, PPP mode, with central government holding 100% of the equity. Statement is wrong, right? So it will be developed in PPP mode. State government, central government. State government will be holding 51% equity in these particular parks, right? Central government having 49%. Okay, second statement is also wrong. Right option will be option D. None of the statements are true. Next, right, just updates here. QES, right? Last week we have discussed the concept of QES, quarterly employment surveys. Very recently in the Hindu, they have raised certain questions, or they have raised certain issues with respect to the QES survey. Their argument is simply this. Remember the arguments here. One, they are basically saying that you are taking the data of economic census 2013 and 2014. And for those of you who are hearing this particular term for the first time, please go back to the last week's video. We have discussed the concept of economic census there. So for QES, you are taking the data from 2014 economic census. Economic census, right? Look at the name there. Economic census is conducted throughout the year. Is it okay? For collection of a data under economic census, the census is conducted throughout the year, and this is a census. Is it okay? It is a census. Whereas quarterly employment survey, look at the name here. They are saying this is a survey. Both are different concepts altogether. Is it okay? This is a census where the data is collected for full year. Whereas this, right, you are going to collect the data for a very short reference period. And how can you compare these two different sets of data? That is the first argument. Second argument, right, for calculation of QES, right, how much has been the increase, right, we have basically taken the enterprises or the units where the number of employees are either 10 or more than 10. But the argument of this particular article is how many units are having at least 10 employees form a very small number of total units which are considered under economic census. Is it okay? I will repeat it. Under QES, we have considered those units which are having at least 10 units of employment. But their argument is, in the economic census, these particular units which are having at least 10 units of employment, it forms a very small proportion of total units considered under EC. That is the second counter argument. Third argument with respect to QES is, when you are taking a data with respect to only these particular 10 plus units of employment, or at least 10, you are talking about a formal or organized sector. But in case of India, most of the employment that basically operates in the Indian economy or works in the Indian economy works in the informal segment. Is it okay? Most of the employment is in informal segment. So based on this particular data, how can you come to a conclusion with respect to employment or unemployment situation in case of India, where majority of the working population is in this particular segment? Right, so these are some of the issues which have been raised with respect to quarterly employment surveys, which was there in the newspapers in the last 1 week. Done. So the next article with respect to committee of creditors. Okay, with respect to committee of creditors, just an simple information here. Now, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, which is the regulator for IBC implementation, has stated that committee of creditors will be coming under the purview of IBBI. I will repeat it. Just remember this particular information here. Committee of creditors will be coming under the regulatory fold of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. Why this is important? In the last couple of years, since the implementation of IBC, we have seen that one of the issues that is plaguing the effectiveness of IBC is the Committee of Creditors functioning. That is, in case of Committee of Creditors, this is the most important decision making body within the IBC system. Most important decision making body. And various points of time it has been seen that there is a process, there is a delay in having insolvency resolution process, because some of the creditors are approaching judiciary filing cases in order to delay the insolvency resolution. Whatever could be the reason, that is not important, but they are basically delaying the process of insolvency resolution, and that is having a negative impact on the effectiveness of the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So what IBB has stated is, now COC, that is the Committee of Creditors, will come under the regulatory purview of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. IBBI will come out with, let's say, guidelines, set of guidelines which will have to be adopted, which will have to be followed by Committee of Creditors now. Right? That is the importance of this particular news. Apart from this, nothing else is important in the article. Don't try to read the whole article, not important. Done? This is just an update. Last small tidbit here, sovereign credit rating. Very recently, Moody's has announced that it has upgraded the outlook on India. Many of you were confused, right? Many of you are asking, sir, what do you mean by outlook here? We have heard of credit rating. What is an outlook? Simply understand there are two components whenever you talk about credit rating agencies. And in the global market, there are three major credit rating agencies. One is S&P, Standard & Poor. Second one is Fitch, and the third one is Moody's. And the article discusses about the Moody's recent upgrading of the outlook. So in case of credit rating agencies, there are two very important concepts. One is actual credit rating, and the second one is what is the outlook. Now difference here is, credit rating basically gives you an idea of how much is the credit worthiness of the borrower. In the recent past, has he borrowed something? Has he repaid? Is there any issue related to borrowing done by this particular economy? Is there a higher fiscal deficit? Is there a higher revenue deficit? What is the total debt of this particular economy? All of these particular parameters are considered, then they provide sovereign credit rating. I am talking about sovereign credit rating here. Right? So credit rating is the representation of this. What about outlook then? Outlook basically will give you an idea of what kind of credit rating could be provided by the agency in the near future. Is it okay? It will give you an idea of orientation of this particular, let's say, the Moody's as to what kind of credit rating it can provide to Indian economy, let's say after 6 months or let's say within 12 months. So generally the outlook will provide you the orientation, right? In the future, what can be done. Credit rating will provide you what is the view of the rating agency currently with respect to, let's say, a sovereign or let's say any economy or a company for that matter. So in case of outlook, there are three very important points. One, generally they will have an outlook which is called as a neutral, positive and a negative. Is it okay? Positive, negative, neutral. What is the meaning of these three terms? When they say neutral, it simply means in the next 6 to 12 months, the rating agency might not change, right, the credit rating of a particular economy. What about positive? There is a high probability, again understand this, there is no guarantee, there is a high probability that the credit rating agency might, right, improve by basically increase the credit rating, improve the credit rating of a particular economy. Let's say there is a particular country whose credit rating or sovereign credit rating is BBB. This could be increased to AA or could be increased to A or AAA, again just a hypothetical situation. So a positive upward revision could be provided by the credit rating agency. That is the meaning of positive outlook. What about negative outlook? In case of a negative outlook, it simply means that they will, right, most probably revise the credit rating downwards. Rather than having, let's say, AAA, this could be downward or rated downwards, let's say to AA, single A, right, BBB or BB like this, right. So these are the three terminologies which are being used with respect to credit rating, the agency's outlook on the Indian economy. Beyond this, don't worry about this particular evolution. Evolution is not important. As of now, Moody's has provided a credit rating of a Baa3 for Indian economy. Remember simply this, Baa3 for the Indian economy, which is the lowest grade within the investment. Within the investment grade, this is the lowest rating that has been provided for Indian economy. So this is just an update with respect to credit rating for Indian economy. Beyond this, please do not mug up this particular sequence as such. Done? So these are some of the important articles. In addition to this, I found two important articles from the PIB. One, PLB, that is a productivity linked bonus to railway employees. This has been announced very recently by the cabinet, and please understand this is not anything new. This is announced annually for the railway employees. Is okay? Remember this. This is announced annually by the government for railway employees. Is it announced for all the railway employees? No. This is announced generally for, right, non-gazetted employees within the railways. Is it okay? Non-gazetted railway employees. Within this also again, railway protection force, railway special protection force employees are not covered. But essentially this is announced for non-gazetted employees of the railways. And generally the number of days will be taken, and whatever the wages are paid for these number of days, that will be given as a concept of productivity linked bonus or PLB by the government. And the object is very simple here. Government says we want to promote more and more productivity from the railway employees, and that is the precise reason we are going to announce PLB in case of railway employees. Now in regards to this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements regarding PLB in railways. Railways was the first departmental undertaking to introduce a PLB. Statement is true. This was the first department undertaking. This was introduced back in 1979 and 80. Second, all the railway employees are covered under this. Absolutely wrong. Non-gazetted. And again I have told you, within this also, railway protection force employees will not be covered. Railway special protection force employees will not be covered. So only first statement is true. Right option will be option A here. Second important point, tax inspectors without borders, TIWB. This has been launched very recently in Seychelles. And why this becomes important? India has been chosen as a partner for the implementation of the tax inspectors without borders. This is a joint initiative of OECD and United Nations. Okay, and we are implementing this particular concept of a TIWB. And earlier also India has been chosen as a partner in the earlier year also, but recently this has been chosen in context of a TIWB being implemented in Seychelles. And what is this TIWB? As per PIB, it states that Government of India is going to provide certain assistance through the tax department, where tax administration in the Seychelles will be improved in the next 12 months. So we are going to provide the tax expertise, we are going to provide assistance to this particular country to develop the tax administration. So that is the discussion with respect to the concept of a TIWB, more than sufficient for UPSC. So these are the various articles as well as the questions related to these particular articles for this particular time period between 2nd to 8th of October 2021. If you like the initiative, please hit the like button, provide your valuable comments or inputs in the comment section below. If you have not yet subscribed to BYJU'S IAS channel, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Have a good day.